welcome to another episode of Two Who's Review. I'm Alex,
I'm Fitz.
and today we are continuing with Revival Who, and we're going to be discussing Tooth and Claw. It's
Ooh.
Doctor Who meets werewolves. It's second in a trend of the show explaining away supernatural or mythical phenomena with aliens, or in this case, a lupine wavelength hemiveriform.
Oh, well, if you want to talk about the whole show, definitely not the second time. It was done fairly frequently. This is continuing Doctor Who's, I think at least fairly long tradition of mashing up different genres.
Mm-hmm.
Everything from Ghostlight to the reworking of the Frankenstein myth
Oh yeah.
for Brandon Morbius. Um, and it's really fun seeing them continue that tradition. I must admit.
Yeah, it's interesting this one. It's like it's almost like the episode is kind of like because I remember with the ghosts in Unquiet Dead,
Hmm.
they really like went through the explanation as to what uh they were, and
Hmm.
they spent a whole scene going, okay, so there are these things called the Gelth that can only travel in gas, and they can temporarily inhabit bodies in order to walk around and communicate.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And in this situation, it's just kind of like Tennant sort of speeds through an explanation while freeing Rose from some shackles. Because the episode knows, it's like we don't really care what the in-depth explanation is.
Yeah.
Just show us an alien werewolf and then have it run through some corridors chasing people. That's all we want.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully they're not doing what Doctor Who sometimes can do, where they're sacrificing spectacle for story, I think, 'cause
Yeah.
there's enough dramatic heft in it. But yes, you're right to point out that certainly by this point, it's season two of the revival, the audience knows what it's getting into. We're gonna see freaky sci-fi werewolf shit happen. Let's just get to that. And even in the end, when the werewolf is defeated, um, the explanation that the Doctor gives as to why an overexposure to moonlight will defeat it. It's simple, but it's still pretty effective. He says, "Yeah, like, well, yeah, the human body's made of 70% water, but you can still drown."
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that you could argue it's taking a bit of a risk there, not giving heaps of explanation. But even in that instance, in the end, it's still being clear enough, and
Yeah,
certainly not
definitely.
meandering in a lot of scientific jargon and needless exposition as to what this is.
Hmm.
Um, not that the, not that the characters really have a lot of time for that because they spend a lot of time running around corridors being chased by this thing. So,
Yep.
yep.
I suppose we'll just jump straight over to timescales.
Um, uh,
So
the
you
before we do, there is one smaller thing I do want to mention. In
okay? Yeah.
terms of genre mashup, the the kung fu monks. I just okay. Look, um, there are a couple of things to say about that. So the first is they're taking quite a big risk in doing that. Not just in terms of content with having monks that can do kung fu. Um, in Scotland in the 1800s, I guess that's a thing. Um,
Sure.
but even with style, because if you look at the scenes that they're featured in, where they're doing their martial arts business, the MMA monks, they they're it's strangely stylized, and I mean that makes sense because it's Doctor Who. But again, they're taking a huge risk there because they've got all these really rapid, quick cuts and strange close-ups when they're um, fighting people. And then there's, honest to God, there's this scene where you can hear like a kung fu style gong in the background, it just on the musical score, and the reason why I find that so astonishing is not just because they, you know, had the spine to do that, the will to do that, but it works pretty well, I think, given how again how bold that mix of genres is. Like that could have been so disastrous and it could have looked so hokey, but it just there's something about this episode with the way it's written and the way it's directed and the way it's edited that it all just kind of comes together. It sort of comes back to what I said where RTD, he would sort of refine a sense of stylization as his tenure would go on. And even though maybe this isn't, a perfect example of that, it's not perhaps as good as it would be in, season 4, for example. Um, it's, I think, a clear sign that the show has evolved a lot and it's finding its own style. Again, as I've said before, mixing the kind of mannered, over the top quality of the classic series with a more cinematic style, and you can definitely see this in the direction and editing in this. Incidentally, kudos to Euros Lyn, the director, who
Yeah.
apparently would go on to direct episodes of Daredevil and Heartstopper, which is interesting.
Oh.
But anyway, the point is, all of those things kind of works together surprisingly well, and I really quite enjoy and admire the episode for doing that. Especially when you consider the fact that the monks, practicing kung fu, it doesn't actually have a lot of bearing on the plot
Not
because
really.
it doesn't get brought up again. And when you think about it, like why like martial arts? Like why was that the thing that they needed to subdue the people in the house? Could they not have used other weapons or something? Or it's a bit strange and doesn't quite narratively fit together, but stylistically it fits together surprisingly well. So yeah, I wanted to bring that up because I found it fascinating just watching that scene.
Yeah, I know a lot of people find that that sequence kind of hokey, and it kind of takes them out of it because they're it's so incredulous, and
Mm-hmm.
it is kind of like, this is a werewolf story and this is how we're starting it.
Yeah,
Okay. I don't mind it. I think it's fun.
yeah,
Yeah,
it
at the very least, it sets the tone of, okay, these guys, they're up to something. They're not
yeah,
your everyday run of the mill
yeah. There's that
Brotherhood of
element of
Monks.
there's a conspiracy element to it. The fact that,
Yeah,
oh, okay, they're all wearing the same uniform. Okay, there's something going on here. Not sure what that is, um, but yeah, it works surprisingly well in the context of the episode itself and the style and tone of the show in general. Especially again, given how disastrously hokey that could have been, because it's almost something you'd expect from a wacky genre mashup from the 70s, whereas, certainly in my opinion, genre mashups, in at least in a lot of Hollywood movies, would only really start to be perfected in the 80s with stuff like, I don't know, Near Dark or The Fly, for example. But anyway,
sure.
so it could have been kind of disastrous, but it wasn't. It works kind of well, and I admire it. The fact that they had the spine to really just go that far because it's so
Yeah,
strange. But as you say, very very entertaining nonetheless.
definitely, yeah.
Hmm.
Let's hop over to timescales. Out
Yeah,
of
sure.
209 votes, this episode has an average rating of 7.1.
Um.
I think that's a bit low. I really like this episode.
Yeah, I'd go a little higher. As well. I really there were maybe a couple of moments that didn't quite work together. We'll get into them, but for the most part, a really solid, entertaining story. Again, a very a very Doctor Who story.
Yeah,
The fact that they're mashing up kung fu movies with horror movies with sci-fi. The fact that they're putting all these things together, even just as boldly as they are, is quite good. This yeah, I'm sure I've referred to this before, and I probably do so again. The chase walked, so episodes like Bad Wolf and this story could run. You
yeah,
can see there's a lineage there that the writers are aware of. And the fact that they have, again, the courage to say, yep, we're just going to shovel this random stuff in there, and we know the audience is going to trust us, because. But the fact that they pull it off so well. So
yeah.
yeah, but overall, yeah, I found this to be a very entertaining story. Lots of great moments, just really satisfying story arcs, and suitably terrifying as well, which is good fun.
Yeah, it falls basically bang in the middle of all the 10th Doctor stories in terms of uh, overall rankings. I don't really want to count ahead or below. I couldn't really tell which one to do. It
Mm.
is sort of like it is like really close to the center of this overall list on the timescales. which isn't surprising. Like it's really good, but it's not. Uh, it's nothing mind blowing. It's not
Yeah,
to
it's
the,
it's
to the level that a lot of Tennant's era will get to.
it's better than I think in some ways than I remember it, but yeah, like
Hmm.
it's not some sort of boundary breaking masterpiece or anything like that.
Yeah, and I
It's
don't
just
really
a
think it's trying
solid
to be.
episode. Yeah.
It's a 6.9 for plot. I kind of understand that in the sense that there isn't really a lot of it. Like, it really is just kind of like a get everyone into the manor and then unleash a werewolf.
See,
You know,
I'm not
well,
bothered by that
no, I'm not
much.
either, but I can understand why
Mm,
some people would say, well, there isn't a lot of plot. I'll rank that a bit
mm,
low.
mm. Maybe. I think, yeah, I can understand, as you say, why other people would say that. I tend to bulk against that sort of logic, not just with this episode, but with other stuff as well. Like, I'm not bothered if there's not a lot happening in a plot, as long as it's fairly well constructed. And I get, as I've said before with Doctor Who, the plot's the most important thing because that's the type of story it's going for. But at the very least, for an example, I would rather something that's a bit light on plot to something that has too much plot, for example.
Yeah, exactly, easily.
Um, but yeah, I guess it makes some sense that people view it that way.
7.6 for acting. Sure, like no one's bad in this.
Yeah, I can't think of anyone. Yeah, there's no one that really bothers me. And even when you got the strange moments where um, the head of the cult is saying, what I don't know what he's exactly saying in English. I think it's wolf god or something. When he's saying that in Latin over and over, that gets a little hokey, but that's more down to the writing. And again, it all sort of fits together in the style they're going for. And there are some pretty good stand-up performances. I
Yeah,
forgot to check, but the woman who plays Queen Victoria, she's really great.
yeah,
Um,
definitely. Pauline Collins, I think I looked it up earlier.
oh, cool. Yeah. Well, yeah. Pauline Collins is um,
I'll double
quite
check that now
impressive
because I don't want to
and
get
very
any
compelling.
information wrong.
Hmm. Um,
I'm just yeah, Pauline Collins.
hmm. Um, but yeah, quite entertaining. Even some of the minor characters, there's nothing uh, wrong with them. I think in terms of performances, they're compelling enough. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, there's certainly nothing in this story that makes you think, oof, that's a. So yeah, it's pretty good.
7 for effects. Yeah, look, like it's unavoidable when talking about an episode like this. They clearly went all CGI for the werewolf.
Yeah,
It hasn't held up incredibly well,
no,
but like it's not to the extent that it's like I wouldn't say it's a bad effect. Like it's dated,
mm.
but it's still like a cool design, and I think that gets it over the line for the most part.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, I agree.
yeah,
Uh,
it's definitely not to the standard that we're used to with CGI creations these days.
yeah, yeah. It's a thing that you've I think mentioned before. A lot of CGI in the mid to late 2000s just it was inevitable. It wasn't going to age well. To
Yeah.
the credit of the show, the way the werewolf is directed is quite good. We've got a lot of
Oh yeah.
shots from its POV when it does the killings for both budgetary and censorship constraints, as
Hmm.
in stories past of Doctor Who. You don't see that happening, which is really great. And
Yeah.
enhances the mystery and the horror of it, and that all really sort of works to its benefit. But yeah, like you can't talk about this episode and talk about the werewolf and not acknowledge, yes, of course it visually just hasn't aged terribly well. But it's not. It certainly doesn't ruin the episode for me. It's
No,
backed up
and
by
it's
strong story and it's quite compelling in itself.
yeah, it's by no means the worst CGI creation the Doctor Who's ever created.
No.
It doesn't even come close. And I think a big part of that is also how emotive the wolf is. Um,
Mm.
in particular, the shot when the Doctor and the wolf are on opposite sides of the wall, and you get a really like a long extended close up of the wolf.
Mm.
It's very expressive in that shot,
Yeah, it's got
especially.
a nice bit of personality. And as I said before, great direction.
Mm,
Just a nice visual idea that really works. So, yeah, obviously, not great effects, but it does a lot to sort of work around that and help it, I think. And you're right in saying that the animators, I think, knew even if they had to sacrifice a bit of, I guess, photorealism in how, the wolf looks, they made up for it a fair bit with giving the wolf some personality, which is
Hmm.
quite good.
6.9 for replay value. I think this is a story that it's always better than you remember it being. I think because it isn't
Mm,
one of those big, huge standout episodes. Like when people think of series two, they normally think of the Cybermen versus the Daleks at the end of the story, or
mm,
stuff like the Impossible Planet with the black hole, or the Girl in the Fireplace. This
mm,
one isn't like isn't as fondly remembered as stories like that, so it can
mm,
tend to be sort of pushed to the side. But like when you watch it, it's like, yeah, this is really good.
yeah,
So in that
I
sense, I
agree.
think the replay value should be boosted beyond 6.9. I think it's really good on a replay
Yeah,
actually.
I found it. I don't know if I'd say like it got like super like better on a second watch, but it certainly got it. Definitely didn't get any worse.
Yeah,
It's at least as enjoyable on a second watch as is on a first. And there are little moments I notice as it tends to happen when you watch things more than once that I don't think I noticed quite as much in the first run. So that was quite good.
yeah.
So yeah, I would certainly put it a bit higher than that.
Than it is listed. Yeah,
Hmm.
and 5 out of 97 people say that this story requires a previous. It doesn't really. I think for the Tennant and Rose stuff,
Hmm.
maybe, but and maybe if you had seen like a previous episode that hinted at Torchwood,
Hmm.
you might pick up on, oh, hang on, that's familiar, and then when we see the Torchwood Institute founded by the end of this, you sort of know how big a deal it is,
But
but it doesn't
that's
really
even
need it.
more. Yeah, that's more even like maybe not an Easter egg, but like um it is a callback, but it's not like a super massive sort of revelation callback because Torchwood, would become sort of more prominent later on,
Yeah,
surely.
yeah, definitely.
It's only been name dropped a couple of times at this point, I think. So even then, it's not massive. If anything, that's more of a thing to clue you in. Oh, this torture thing is probably going to show up again sometime later. Just the
Yeah,
way it sort of is framed in the narrative. Um, so yeah, I'm surprised. Like as you say, that there may be some elements that an audience might like to know, like the relationship between the Doctor and their companions, but even that's taken care of pretty well.
yeah,
The characterizations are strong enough, so you get a feel for who the Doctor is. I mean, even when like Rose says, "Oh, you're a punk," it's like, yeah, the Doctor is a punk when you think about it. So
yeah,
it all just kind of feels together. And even like that first conversation where they're talking about 1979, and he's like, "Oh, the Muppet movie. I always loved that film." And then he's like, "Margaret Thatcher." I'm like, yeah, it just it says a lot, I think, about his character, and it's
yeah, but not
quite.
political.
Oh yeah,
It's a
God.
small example, but even still,
No, no, well, yeah, like it is small, but it still puts a, you know,
yeah,
it punctures that ludicrous narrative. Anyway, but the point is, yeah, like you don't. This is surprisingly good, like entry level Doctor Who episode. If you
oh
haven't
yeah,
seen it before, you can get a really good flavor for what the show is if you watch this
yeah.
episode, which is
I
pretty
think
neat.
it. I think if this is your first watch, it would give you the sense that it's a more of a horror based show than it normally is. Like this definitely skews a bit more on the horror side than it does the sci-fi.
Mm,
So there might be a
maybe,
bit of false advertising if this is your first episode and you're going
maybe a
into
little
other
bit.
stuff expecting it.
Mm.
But like it's a testament to the fact that the show can genre bend every now and then.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you are a little bit right though, because um, even beyond the content, the tone of it is has a lot of horror. And
Yeah,
even the structure of certain scenes has a horror feel to it. So you could, if this is your first episode, you could think, oh, okay, they're using scientific means to figure out the spooky um horror happenings, almost like an X-Files sort of a thing, but that's not quite what the core of the show is. So, yeah, fair enough.
Okay. All that stuff aside, let's jump into a more in depth discussion.
Hmm.
Um, so it's a unique-ish werewolf story. I think like this idea of well, even putting the alien stuff aside, just like gunning for the crown essentially.
Hmm.
It's a far more intelligent werewolf than we're used to seeing, where they're normally just kind of like because the typical werewolf narrative is a tragic tale for the host of the werewolf,
Yeah,
whereas normally
absolutely.
yeah, it's normally this kind of like I can't I'm locking myself in each month on the full moon. I'm finding as much silver as I can. I'm looking for a cure. I hate what I become every month. Uh,
The mm,
and this isn't really that. It's more of like a calculated werewolf. Like even as a human, the werewolf is still the one in control. It just hasn't, it just can't unleash its true
it is
rage until the moon is out.
it is a bit of a contrast. And you're right to point out the tragedy part of it, because even if you go back to a movie like The Wolfman from the 1941 movie, the writer of that of the script, Kurt Siodmak, he said that he modeled the character arc of the main character, Lawrence Talbot, on Greek tragedy. The fact that this
Hmm.
person has a destiny they can't control that they're kind of spearheading towards. And there are actually other movies in the Universal werewolf movie stable where Lawrence Talbot is actually looking for a cure. So you're right to point out that there is this tragic quality that really does get skewed here. You don't get a lot of it, maybe a tiny bit at the end where he's just asking, okay, just let me go, but
Yeah,
it's certainly more of a sort of decidedly villainous werewolf.
yeah. I think it makes it a lot easier uh, to stomach it when it does die at the end.
Mm,
Because if there was a chance, that if there was a chance, the doctor would have tried to find a cure. But I think because this thing is sort of just, I think the way he puts it is like carved out at this boy's soul and put himself in
yeah,
there. It
yeah, carved out his soul and made a hole in his heart. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a really evocative image, and
yeah,
it's a good
yeah. I
way
love
of
that dialogue. It's
demonstrating.
great.
It's a really good way of demonstrating. Okay, this isn't the kind of thing where he's in the cage and he's like, please don't let them do this to me again.
Yeah.
This order of they want the throne, and they found that they've infected me with this alien pathogen that makes me a wolf
Mm,
every full moon.
mm,
They've got me caged. I don't want this. To have that
mm,
dialogue with Rose in the cellar,
mm,
where it's talking about all that stuff about having carved out his soul and
mm,
the empire of the wolf.
mm.
Um, it's it makes this werewolf story seem a lot more unique than I think it probably is, because that element does dip a bit when he is the wolf.
Mm,
Because there's no more talking, there's no more dialogue. All that
mm,
stuff is gone. Even by that point, the main monk is killed. By that point as well. By that point, we know all we need to
mm.
know about the wolf, and he's just out for blood.
Um, yeah, I
I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but like
mm,
there is that element of it right at the start that we do kind of lose when the wolf is out.
yeah, yeah. I see what you mean. It's I guess I don't know. Like I say, it doesn't bother me or anything, but yeah, I suppose you're right about that. Like when he changes into the wolf and just becomes a sort of animalistic, almost like a force of nature, really.
Yeah.
It, I don't know. Like I get the impression that that's how should I phrase this? Almost like deliberate, I
Oh no,
guess.
it definitely is, because you can't set yourself up as it's Doctor Who's take on a werewolf and then not have it be a werewolf.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Um, but yeah, I suppose yeah, it's an interesting point to raise.
Mm. Um, Yeah, you've touched on it before. Queen Victoria is a really nice character to put in this story.
Yeah, she's
Um,
great.
yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Pauline Collins does a fantastic job in this role. I always forget about the scene where she's talking about her dead husband and
Mm,
the yearning to get some sort of contact from the departed.
mm,
It's a really emotive scene, and it's something I noticed on this rewatch. It's the Doctor's face when she finishes telling the story, where he's like, "Oh man, don't I know that more than anyone?
mm,
I've had so many loved ones leave me." It's
mm,
again, like we mentioned last time. It's bizarrely setting up his lonely nature really well, and
mm,
I don't know how deliberate it is, or how much of it was David Tennant's decision in the acting department, or if that was a
mm,
director note. But like it's a really nice moment of uh, genuine emotion in
mm,
what is an otherwise action-packed episode.
mm. Um, it is. It's a nice. There's nice little character moments. You get some more character moments near the end because this is a fairly like you. It's funny you say that there's not a lot of plot in the sense that it is sort of just running around, this house, but like there's quite a few action scenes in it, and
Yeah.
so it's nice to sort of have that pacing brought right back so that we can
Mm.
have these really lovely little character moments. And the fact that Queen Victoria kind of understands the pleasures of supernatural fiction, as she refers to it, um, is really endearing. At least certainly on a personal level, and the fact that it's, as you say, sort of anchored by this yearning um, for the dearly departed, um, gives it a real pathos, which is really good.
Yeah. Um, and I think this episode is it's sort of perfectly placed. Like they picked the perfect time period to set it in.
Oh yeah,
Because
yeah,
they're able to incorporate heaps of like genuine history into it,
mm,
like the numerous assassinations on Victoria's life,
mm,
the diamond constantly being cut down
mm,
over Prince Albert. I think his time with before he died. The royal disease with Queen Victoria being a hemophiliac. It's yeah, it's just like oftentimes with these kinds of episodes, it can the time that it's set in can feel kind of arbitrary because it's sort of like um, I can't think of any good examples, but there it does sometimes happen where it's like you just wanted an episode based in history, but you didn't really put in the legwork to meld the themes with the
yeah,
setting. Or
yeah.
anything
That's
like that.
true.
This episode does a really great job with that, I think.
The integration of its historical context into the plot and also the theme is done in a very compelling way.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I said that like I was gonna say something else. I didn't. That was basically it.
Okay, fair enough. But yeah, it like, and I think you're probably right in pointing out that there are some stories in Doctor Who throughout its whole run where the historical context hasn't been worked in as smoothly as it could have been. I mean, I can't think of any like major examples that spring to mind yet. I don't know. Maybe with the Time Meddler, like I'm 1066. I mean, like we know why that happened because it's part of the monk's plan, but it
Yeah, I
seemed
mean
quite strange.
it could have. That's a situation where it could have been any like important battle throughout history
Hmm.
that the monk was trying to. They just picked one and they were like, yeah, it'll do. Don't necessarily fault them for that, but there have
Yeah,
been
yeah.
better
It's
integrations.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Like it's a very oh wow, what's that? We got a bunch of Viking costumes from the from the BBC props department. Well, we better use them. Um, but yeah, it's I mean, yeah, I think there are definitely probably worse examples. But as you say, with this story in particular, they do sort of integrate it all together in a really satisfying way, and the thing with the Koh-i-Noor, just bringing it all together, um, is really compelling.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Mhm.
I'm just trying to. Well, it wasn't really a case. That's the one thing with the finale, with the final encounter that did kind of fall a little flat to me.
I'm
You know, the
intrigued.
fact that well, they put a big emphasis on the Kohinoor
Hmm.
in towards the back like act of the episode,
Mhm.
and they set it up with the telescope, the light refractor thing at the beginning of
Mhm.
the episode, and I was expecting like because they always had to make sure the cut was right, yeah,
Hmm.
like
Yep.
the shine, make sure the shine was perfect, and I
Hmm.
assumed that would be because it would like sort of slot into the mechanism in such a way that it was able to like bounce the light at you know to make it the brightest it possibly could. But that
Hmm.
wasn't really the case. As it was just sort of like a put it on like put it where the light happens to be on the floor and
Hmm.
sort of angle it the right way,
Mhm.
which isn't is sort of like you could have had. Part of me is sort of like could you have held a mirror up to where that light was and bounced it off that way?
I I don't think so. I think it's because the diamond had been cut to, that specific shape. Only that could, refract the light in a precise enough way for it to cause any damage. I mean, you could argue, was it really would it really have been that much of a problem to put it in the telescope itself or something like that? But I can just believe it because I think, oh well, I assume the Doctor knows what he's doing here. He understands light refraction better than most people. So for me, it just works. Like yeah, I'm fairly convinced that you need that one particular gem to have that precise light refraction to work properly.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Mm,
For my money, it's more of like a if you remove the diamond from the narrative, you could easily have had the light refractor just be have to be aimed in the right direction. Like it's it's perfect the way it is. Like when they put the big emphasis on the diamond, my
mm.
my head is going okay. So clearly this is an important part of the system, and not just kind of like the thing that you need to bounce the light off.
So if, for example, if because it's a Victorian place, presumably they have a fair few mirrors. If the Doctor says, "Okay, go and get me all the mirrors in the house and put them in this room, and we'll refract it like that," if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I
Mm,
don't know what I would prefer to see here.
mm,
It's strange because like it's almost there, but I feel like it just doesn't quite, for me at least, it doesn't quite pass that last hurdle
mm,
to be the perfect melding of these different hanging threads.
mm,
I think again purely because the Doctor just happens to toss it across the floor and it lands in exactly the right spot.
mm,
It is a little bit of a okay. Well, this was kind of an afterthought, maybe. I don't know if it necessarily was, but that's kind of the impression that I got from it.
mm, mm,
Where they wanted to have this extra bit of historical significance to the Kohinoor and have it be this was Prince Albert and Sir Robert's dad. This was their plan to stop the wolf. If it ever came to that, they would build this mechanism that could drown it in its own food source, essentially.
mm.
And they needed to get the diamond exactly right. To me, it was kind of like, well, I imagine those two sort of discussing it and being kind of like, so we've built this thing, but like but how's it gonna work? Okay, well what we need to do is we need to get this diamond and we need to cut it down exactly right. Oh, okay, and then we can just sort of put it in the thing and it'll blast the wolf in all directions. Oh no, just wherever the beam happens to land, just pop it there, just pop it there, wherever it happens to be, just pop it down on the ground and then that'll work. You know what I mean? Like it's not the most scientific, like in terms of into like they essentially
Yeah,
are inventors. It's not
I
the most
mm.
like complete solution.
Again, I'll put that. like I find it believable enough because I assume the Doctor knows what he's doing, even if something feels like an accident or a last minute thought. That the Doctor still, is able to connect those dots in his brain and think, okay, well, this is where we langle it to make it work. So it doesn't um, bother me terribly from that standpoint.
Sure.
But I think, yeah, like that, it's mainly there for thematic reasons and characterization. It's there,
Yeah.
the reminder that Albert, is looking after Victoria, sort of even from the grave. So, um,
Yeah, in
it,
that sense it works, yeah.
yeah, for sure. But in terms of it, as you say, blending cohesively into the narrative, I can accept it. I think it works just enough, especially given that, like, just in terms of characterization in the context of this story, we've got, the Doctor just saying, "Oh yeah, this thing is the werewolf." That's all the information sort of we need. I can just believe it there, but yeah, fair enough. If you wanna, if it bothers you, I can understand why.
Mm. You mentioned Sir Robert. I think a lot of the supporting cast are really strong in this episode. I
Mm,
really like the sort of rise and fall of Sir Robert in this story. Like he's forced to commit treason to spare his wife, and it's
mm,
clearly weighing heavily on him. Like, and he
mm,
mentions it even in his final words to the wolf. I've committed
mm,
treason for you, but now my wife will remember me with honor. Like he's
mm,
clearly an honorable man, and that's something he
mm,
values tremendously. And you can
mm,
see how painful it is for him to be misleading the queen like that, and the amount of times he tries to hint that something might be wrong, eventually with the Doctor picking up on it, which is a nice touch. Like, he actually, he notices that Robert's kind of motioning to the monk and going, so there are some people
mm,
who want the wolf to rise. I'm not saying who, but they're
mm,
at 2 o'clock and have no hair.
mhm.
Uh, yeah, so
Yeah.
it's a really nice arc for him where it's like, he does this thing out of being forced to, and then he feels so racked with
Mm,
guilt about it that he chooses to sacrifice himself in order to essentially, he is the defining thing in the end that does save the day, because he does provide them just enough time to get the light refractor working. So it is a
yeah,
nice
yeah.
ending for him.
It's a definitely a good bit of characterization, good character arc, makes it very dramatically satisfying.
Yeah.
Um, Especially, you know, it sort of ties into the theme of Victoria's love of her late husband.
Mm.
It's about those um, bonds of love, I suppose you could say.
Yeah.
So, yeah, definitely a highlight. But even yeah, like the other side characters are all pretty compelling. Good performances, and they're all written um, pretty well. Um,
Yeah, and we mentioned Sir
yeah.
Robert's wife, and I like that even she gets a moment to sort of make a stand and assist.
Mm,
She's the one who rallies the other maids together to be like, and she's the one who figures out the mistletoe connection, right about
mm,
the same time that the Doctor does, which is very impressive for that era. Um,
mm,
and she does save Rose with it.
mm.
It's nice that she's not just a damsel figure, that
Yeah.
she's not just there for Sir Robert to have something he wants to atone for.
Mm,
It is nice that
absolutely.
she's not just in the episode to be, uh, you know, a tied up
Mm.
damsel hanging over a pit of alligators in order to force Sir Robert to do what the story
Yeah.
needs him to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, it's a good contrast.
Mm.
So yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Um, I want to talk about Rose for a bit,
Oh
actually.
yes, okay.
And
You go
I
first because I've got stuff to say as well.
yeah, I there may be things to bring up that I'm not thinking of, but I have a feeling it may be similar to what I'm going to raise. So a couple of
Mm-hmm.
things. One, the smaller issue I had, the thing with her trying to get the Queen to say we're not amused. I'm pretty sure she does that like it's at least 4 times, isn't it? Isn't it like almost 5 times she
It's
tries
four.
to
I,
do it?
I I counted. It's 4 times, but 2 times are in the same scene.
Yeah, and it look, I know I've said before the Rose just on a gut level doesn't frustrate me as much as she does you, but God, that was so annoying. Like RTD, man, with the writing, what are you doing?
Well, it's one of those moments where it's like sort of it's almost too meta for its
It's
own good. Because
just
the
it
whole
just
"We're Not Amused" thing is such a big meme surrounding Queen Victoria,
yeah.
and I don't. When she finally does say it, I think that moment's like it's not as bad as some of her attempts to get her to say it.
Oh
I
yeah,
think
no,
when
it
she
doesn't
actually does.
feel nearly as forced. But
Oh no, definitely not. But yeah, I think the throwing in the whole thing with Rose trying to get the Queen to say it. Yeah, I tend to agree. It's kind of like a mid. It is kind of like a mid 2000s level of addressing his hit. Something that's very. It's an example of meme culture. I think it's a weird.
almost, yeah.
It's weird. It's like it's a few steps removed from when Missy would dab, some years down the line,
Oh.
which I know you hate, but like I think because this moment sort of plays kind of like that, where it's referencing something almost just
Mm.
to sort of wink at the audience about it, going,
Yeah,
eh?
yeah. Yeah, it is quite frustrating. Not quite as sure if it's as, you know, brain
It's definitely
damaging
yeah,
as Missy dabbing, but
it's not
uh
a beloved character from the classics with decades of history engaging in internet culture for no reason. It's not that level of infuriating,
no,
but
it doesn't cause me to have a minor existential crisis
no,
after watching it, but that's more of a me thing. Anyway,
yeah,
so the point is, yeah, no, it was still really annoying. I'm
yeah.
like really? Like they don't even adhere to like the rule of three, and even if they did, I don't think they're placed in many places where it's super interesting or helpful to the narrative or
No,
even
yeah.
characterizations. Like the way they characterize the queen and the way she kind of you know bats it off. I mean that's fine, but it just got really annoying after a while, and I'm
Well,
like,
when you notice that at least early in the story, that's her only role in the narrative is to try to get the queen to say that. Because for the majority of the scenes that she's in, well, at least the ones that she says that in, her only role is to just be there. There are other scenes where she is doing stuff, but the scenes where she is trying to get the queen to say that, that's the only thing she's doing in the scene.
mm,
So it's something for her to do so the audience doesn't forget she's there, basically.
it's. I mean, I don't want to say that that's entirely true, but as I say, it is still very frustrating. Even like there's that one line which is like, "Oh, scary stories, mom. Isn't that a bit fanciful?" Like that's kind of okay, but doesn't she like say, "It's not amusing, isn't it?" Like literally like 30 seconds later, so it's still
Yeah.
undercut by this again really annoying line. So anyway, that's the smaller issue. The other issue, which I think is a slightly more concern, is there's one bit where they had the opportunity to do a bit of fairly good characterization with Rose when she's trapped with everybody with the werewolf, and she's convincing all of them, "Come on, people, we're not going to just die here. You know, pull the chain and free yourselves." And she does, but literally, like right after that, the Doctor just comes in and saves the day, and I'm like, there was a chance at interesting characterization here, and you just threw it away.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Well,
Like,
Rose gets captured or trapped number 13. I figured it out from last time. I worked out if it wasn't the correct if that wasn't if it doesn't link with the number I would have said last week, I've counted it. That is the correct number. It is number 13.
oh, okay.
Um, and I just want to talk really quickly about
Mm,
like some of the other stuff she does in the episode, which I don't think
mm,
you will have caught.
mm.
Because yeah, it is her moment of rallying the the workers at the Torchwood Institute or the Torchwood Estate rather. Um, I think it's doing more than just what you're like. I think that's the thing. That's the action that convinces Lady Isabel to uh,
Mm-hmm.
be a bit more proactive. Because before that, she's very
Mm,
placid and she's afraid, and
mm.
she's the last person to stand up and start pulling on the chains because of how shell shocked she is. But then after
Yeah, it's a
that, she
good point.
takes a bit more of an active involvement. So I think that's it does a bit more than just taking away a victory for Rose, because that is kind of like it is there for another character's growth.
Yeah,
But
yeah, good point.
that's not where my criticisms end for this episode, because it's not. I think overall it's not the worst Rose episode, but there are some moments that vex me. I praised the moment that Lady Isabel gets to use the mistletoe to save Rose, but do you recall the circumstances surrounding that moment?
Not the precise details, no, remind me.
Cool. For anyone who thinks that I'm remembering this wrong or exaggerating the moment because of my vendetta, I implore you to watch the episode back, and you'll see that I am in no way embellishing this. The moment before the mistletoe is thrown on the wolf, all four of our main characters at that point are running down a corridor. Rose stops, turns on the spot, stands still, and screams.
Right.
And that's the moment. It's not like the wolf has got her in a corner or she trips on something. It's literally she just stops and turns around and screams at it in fear. Keep running, you fucking idiot! You've been keeping your cool so far. Why is this the moment that you suddenly can't handle it anymore? Is it just narratively to give the mistletoe moment something like a moment in the sun, so like, or is it for the trailer, so you can have a moment of, from the monster's perspective, Rose screaming? Like, it's not even a very well acted scream. Like, as much as I haven't really gone after Billie Piper in this role, it's just like in the face. Her body's like, the rest of her body acting doesn't really convey fear. It's literally just like, it plays almost like the director gave the note, okay, well, in the script it says you do this, so I guess you do this, and Billie Piper went, hang on, what? Why wouldn't Rose just keep running? And then the director sort of went, yeah, I know, but that's what RTD wrote, and so just can you just do it? That's honestly the way it plays, and it stood out to me every single time, because like, there is literally no reason for Rose to do that. She has been fine the entire episode.
Yeah, I mean that does make sense. I think.
I'll see if I can actually find that scene in isolation and link it to you later, so you can
Sure.
check it out for yourself without having to go back and watch in a full episode.
Yeah,
to do it.
fair enough.
Because I promise you that is what happens, and it's infuriating to me.
Yeah. I don't doubt that that's how it does play out. Yeah, I think it may go back to something I touched on earlier. Maybe this is an example of spectacle overtaking story. Because as you say,
yeah.
that's a trailer moment, yeah. That's
Yes.
that's and I mean I can't remember all the details of the trailer for this season, but I do not doubt for a second that was put in there.
Well, because it's such an easy fix. All you needed to do is trip over the carpet and then have her sort of on the floor backing up, trying to stand up, and then in that moment the wolf's ready to pounce, and then the mistletoe gets thrown on the wolf. It's such an easy fix, but it's just, for me, it's just one of the most lazy things that RTD has ever written into one of his stories. But there's a larger issue that I want to bring up here.
Sure.
And it happens really early in the episode. It's super innocuous. You probably missed it. But to me, it's the herald of my second huge problem with Rose. I've mentioned before there are two main problems I have with Rose Tyler as a whole. The first is more of an issue in the Series 1. The second is more of an issue in Series 2. And here's the start of it. She finds Flora, I think her name is, the maid, in the cupboard. And she tells Rose what's been going on. There's been people, they've been taking everyone, and I hid because I didn't know what to do. And Rose's first instinct, the first thing she thinks to do to help out is, I'll take you to the doctor, he can help. Now that seems like a nothing moment.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, it does feel like a bit of a nothing moment, but anyway, yeah, you continue.
Yeah, it would seem like something not really to draw that much attention to, but here's the thing. It's a herald of what will become Rose's crippling... I've said the word before, it's escaping me now. Codependency. It's a herald of Rose's crippling codependency to the Doctor, which will become much more of an issue later on. But I'll give you some quick examples off the top of my head
Mm-hmm.
of other things companions have done in similar situations.
Mm-hmm.
Clara's first episode in the TARDIS, she encounters
Mm-hmm.
someone in peril, and she takes matters into her own hands to help her out.
Mm-hmm.
Amy's first episode, she encounters someone in peril, takes matters into her own hands to help her out. Donna's first episode in the TARDIS, her whole deal is about help these people. If you won't, I will. We need to get them all to safety.
Mm-hmm.
And that was again, that was all of their. It wasn't their first time experiencing weird shit with the Doctor, but it was their first time on the TARDIS on an adventure. Rose has been doing this for over a year, a full season of television, and she still can't take any proactive steps in her own stories. Her first instinct is, well, I can't do anything, but I'll take you to someone who can. But and yet, her first episode, she's introduced as someone with little ambition, or at the very least, little self confidence in what she can do. You know, she's having that conversation with fake Mickey, and she's like, "Well, is this what my life's going to be now that I don't have a job, just serving up chips?" You know, a clear story arc for her would be she learns that she's capable of more. But instead, what happens over this series is that she retains that I can't do anything mentality, but now she's got a man to do everything for her. And that is an oversimplification, I admit, but it's also not entirely inaccurate. And this is the start of it. When I see a companion say to someone in distress, I can't help you, but I'll take you to someone who can, my first thought is, well, why are you traveling with the Doctor in the first place? What are you bringing to the table? That's my piece. Please respond.
Sure. Yeah, you raised some pretty good points. I think if you were to just if you want to put it into context, it's not that bad. And as we said, like if this was your first Doctor Who episode, that element wouldn't be too much of a problem because that stuff has happened before with companions throughout
Sure, yeah.
throughout its run. I think there's a criticism that gets thrown against the classic series in particular. For a fair good reason that a lot of companions, particularly women companions, are unfortunately just sort of relegated to a damsel in distress, which is really unfortunate. But
Yeah.
yes, that has tended to happen. It's not good overall when it happened then. So arguably it shouldn't be great when it's happening now. But it's not. It's not something that super stands out to me. And I mean, well, obviously it didn't. Otherwise, you wouldn't have had to point it out. But anyway, in the sense that it's similar to things that have happened before, it doesn't hugely bother me. I will say, however, I'm sure there are even examples in the classic series where you have companions being more proactive and productive. Whether it be Sarah Jane with her super sleuthing, or for example, the last story we looked at in Destiny of the Daleks. You are absolutely right to point out that despite what my initial thoughts on that story were, Romana actually is given a fair bit to do. As I said, it didn't really gel properly with the narrative, which is why it felt emotionally unsatisfying. But she's doing stuff. She's trying to help the workers. She's using her Time Lord abilities to pretend to be dead. So the point is, even in those instances, you've got companions who are at least trying to do something. You know what I mean? So I can understand why this would frustrate you. And certainly, like, when you put it into the bigger picture, it would become more frustrating. I will say, I can't, think...
Just real quick, it's not a huge problem in isolation, but it's emblematic of not just a larger problem that will develop, but also one of the bigger problems I have with Rose, at the very least, compared to other characters that are more hands-on and helpful in their own right when taken outside of the Doctor's also here.
I think, for me, even with that context, it doesn't super bother me. Having said that, the one thing that I did sort of pick up on when you said it was the fact that it's happened so late in her characterization. That's a little bit unfortunate. Like if if this had happened like on their second, third, or maybe even fourth adventure, it would be a little bit more understandable because Rose may still be getting used to the adventures that the Doctor's going on, and she may not be used to how dangerous and dark it can get. But like as you say, we're in season 2 by this point.
Yeah.
Um, by which point she should have had, you know, a decent sort of character arc, and she
Yeah.
doesn't seem to have been put in an effective enough position where she's progressing um, as a character. So,
Exactly. Like the examples
hmm,
that I gave of characters that
hmm,
were taking more steps than Rose. Again, that was their first adventure. Rose has been doing it for a long time now, and if you showed me this episode and said this was her first trip in the TARDIS, I would believe you.
hmm, mm, mm,
We haven't seen any growth from her, and we
mm,
won't see any growth from her. And she gets more companion time than most revived series companions.
mm,
To me, the balance is way tilted in Rose's favor for no good reason. At the very least, not a lot of. It's not earned by the
mm,
character, in my
mm.
opinion. But that's my take. I'm gonna have. In 2 weeks, we'll be looking at School Reunion. I'm gonna have much worse things to say about her in that episode. But we'll get to that when we get to that. It's a nice episode for the Doctor. I like how curious he is about a lot of the stuff. I mean, there's the obvious moment where he sees the wolf for the first time, and the first thing he can do is exclaim how beautiful it is to him. You know, even though
Mm,
it is this murderous beast with no good in its heart,
mm.
he sees something unique and he goes, "Oh, amazing!" You know, it's a
Yeah,
really nice character moment for the Doctor.
yeah,
And even his fascination with Sir Robert's dad and the house and all the different safety measures that were put in, you know, and contrasted with how he snaps at Robert when he's like, "We don't have any weapons. There's no point."
mm,
You know, it's a really nice all round episode for Tennant, which I think this episode especially does a lot to help distinguish him from Eccleston because he's very upbeat in this one. He's very positive,
mm.
and
Yep.
Eccleston could do that, but I don't think he did it to this extent.
No, no, definitely not. He's because we've discussed before. Eccleston has that kind of fun, whimsical side, but even when you see it, it's almost like he's deliberately being whimsical to mask the fact that he's so traumatized, and that's
Yeah,
kind of one of the great elements of his characterization. This, in contrast, feels more sustained. I'm not sure if I'd say it's more sincere, but it's certainly more of a core trait, I think, to Tennant than it is to Eccleston. So
definitely. Yeah,
yeah, and you're right. This is a really good Doctor story. It shows like all those great elements that you want out of a good Doctor characterization. You know, he's funny, he's witty, he's curious. Analyzes things scientifically. He's adventurous and bold. Like we mentioned with New Earth, there's that bit where the Doctor says, you said you don't want to die. We'll live a little, but that's shown in this story in a way in a more effective way than it is in New Earth, because he's not saying it, but he's showing it. He's showing it when he's calling the werewolf beautiful, despite the fact that he realizes it could tear him to bits. It's that one bit which I love where he's licking the walls. It's
yeah,
so weird and kind of dumb, but like it just shows that um he is used to taking sort of calculated risks, and but he also has the will to do that, which this is getting a bit more broad here, but it's a nice contrast to the way other Time Lords act, for example.
oh yeah,
Um, they're not, they don't have that spirit of adventure that the Doctor has, and it's so great to see it shine through here. Um, and it is like it's just on face value, it's just very entertaining, but it also it's in a long term sense more very endearing. So yeah, it's really great to see him be like that. There is one other bit of characterization I want to bring up, mostly with regards to Victoria, but it also has more long-term implications with the Doctor, I think. And it's when it's that final speech, well, not the final speech, but the bit where Victoria banishes the both of them.
Yeah,
I really like that because I think I mentioned to you before that, as far as I understood it, one of the character arcs for Tennant is him realizing that, like, because of the amount of power he has, um, I don't know, he's almost framed as like a godlike figure, but it's the realization that that's actually not a very good thing. And
yeah,
even I think, as you pointed out, for him it's probably more, his characterization is more about the loneliness element, but I do think this other element is there too, and it rears its head again because I really do like when Victoria says, you who consort with magic and stars and think it fun. Um, Granted, that speech is, it's sort of mired in with, superstition and things like that, but the core of it, I do agree with. Yeah, I think Doctor Who, and the Doctor specifically, I wouldn't say, like, I don't know if I'd say if it's objectively at its best, but it really works for me personally when I see um this, supposed godlike quality of the Doctor just punctured. I find it very compelling, realizing that, being a Lord of Time is not a very good thing. It has a lot of
yeah.
burdens to it,
Well, it's
and
also
even,
a, it's a theme that will crop up again in the future and in more pronounced ways. But the sort of the tragic nature of the Doctor as someone, for he can't, he like it's impossible for him to escape. The lingering death that seems to follow him everywhere he goes.
yeah,
And Victoria's like almost proven right later on. Like there is a large part of it that is steeped in superstition,
hmm,
but the moment towards the end of the Family of Blood,
hmm,
when Nurse Redgrave, I think, or whoever the Doctor as John Smith is in love with, she asks him plainly if the Doctor never visited us, would anyone here have died? And the answer is no. Like through no fault of his own, that is the life he lives, and having and getting reminded of that every now and again is one of the more tragic elements of the Doctor.
hmm. I think I I don't know. I feel like, to an extent, like, he does bear some sort of responsibility
Oh
in
yeah, of
that
course.
element of it, and I think that's probably the most compelling element for me, that there is this constant conflict, realizing that, gallivanting across time and space and making these big, massive decisions, there's a definite cost to that, and that because of that, he is the lonely god, the man who keeps running, um, and him wrestling with the fact that, you know, having that, like, the idea of one person having that, a massive amount of power, to control the destinies of so many people. There's something disturbing I find about that, and I really like it when the show wrestles with that theme, really sort of solidly, and I think it does so, as you say, probably more consistently in other stories, but it still does it here, and I really like the fact that they do that.
Mm. And there's also like little things like this, just a small element of, at the very least, to like a small extent. The one of the main reasons this episode exists is to allow David Tennant to speak in his normal Scottish accent for some time.
Yeah, that was funny.
Yeah, because
And it,
if you don't know he's Scottish, you're thinking that's a pretty good Scottish accent that David
yeah,
Tennant, the Englishman, is putting on there. When
yeah,
in reality, it's like no, that English accent that he's doing
mm,
really consistently is something that he's putting on
mm.
and has done for many years. It's just something that he can do, and his natural Scottish is Scottish. That's all it is.
Little, and that very introduces himself. Fun little BBC references. Dr. James McCrimmon
Mm-hmm.
of Balamori.
Yeah.
What's the story in Bala fucking Mori? Yeah, it's it's just very funny. Um, it kind of goes back to what you said. It is meta that they're doing that, obviously, but it's reined in enough so it's just a fun little wink at the audience. And
Yeah.
I mean, I assume that's from the writing department. Maybe Um, maybe David Tennant improvised a bit of that line, but yeah, it's probably more
Potentially, like
Archie's writing.
it wouldn't surprise me if it is the writing. Like I
Mm.
know for like the Jadoon are named as such because it was difficult for David Tennant in his Scottish to say ooh so many times. Like Jadoon would come out as Jadoon, and so he had to really work to get that name right. So that
Mm.
that species was named that way purely to troll David Tennant to some extent.
Platoon of Jadoon on the moon. How
Yeah,
hilarious.
that line exists exactly to test
Mm.
David Tennant in his
That's
British ooh
that's funny.
voice.
That's funny. But yeah, no,
um,
it's very interesting just to watch the change.
mm,
When he drops the accent, it's just yeah. Especially if you know again that he is Scottish, just and it is also again just a testament to David Tennant's performance, the fact that he, as Victoria says, can change his voice so quickly.
yeah, yeah. Um, any more to discuss?
I don't I don't think so. I think we've basically covered all of it.
Yeah, I will
Yeah.
say it is a nice touch to have us like learn so much about what Torchwood would become this early. It
Mm,
does make a change from the Bad Wolf arc last time, where they would just sort
mm.
of throw out Bad Wolf references every now and then to intrigue you, be like, okay, what's going on here? The fact that we've had a deliberate setup of okay, this is what Torchwood is, and you'll better be ready for it because it's
Yeah.
coming. It's gonna be
Yeah.
important later. I think it's a nice approach to take,
Mm.
especially after the previous. Well, it's also going to set up a pattern of okay, last season wasn't a one off. We are doing full on series arcs. We've had the Bad
Mm.
Wolf arc. Now it's time for the Torchwood arc.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. It's pretty well integrated and better, and yeah, I'd say probably a bit better integrated in terms of how it structurally fits into the narrative than Bad Wolf. I mean, Bad Wolf works, but it's more its inclusion almost felt retroactive because it's like it's there because Rose, you know, consumed the heart of the TARDIS, and so she's putting it in all the previous episodes. So it's I don't know, it's sort of a weird timey wimey,
Mm.
loopy thing.
Well, we're gonna
Um,
have to keep a lookout for more Torchwood references in the future to see if they actually drop more hints or if they're
yeah, sure.
Bad Wolf level Easter eggs. Because if they
Um,
are, it does leave us kind of a bit lacking because we'll have a lot of
maybe.
setup and then Easter egg, Easter egg, Easter egg, Easter egg, Easter egg, and then all the payoff, which isn't quite as smooth as it could be.
Hmm. I mean, you could argue like, oh well, it leads to Torchwood, but then that's a whole different series, and
Well, yeah.
yeah. Incidentally, I did because I think I said um during it may have been when we looked at the Christmas Invasion, but um I'd wondered when Torchwood started. So yeah, so it did start in 2006, but this season of Doctor Who ended in July, I think, and Torchwood started in October. So it was definitely,
Yes.
after this and
Yeah,
when they
definitely.
all had to go underground. It was funny, but I was watching the beginning of the first episode of Torchwood a while ago, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is what Cuff meant. They're not really sort of working the police, and they're not really looked up to. All right, I guess that'll sort of make sense. Anyway, that's a
Mm.
separate topic. Um, but yeah,
Um,
I think we're pretty good for
we're done.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, for this story.
I'm gonna give this episode an 8. I think it's really, really solid. It's a good example of a horror blending with sci-fi. It's an interesting take on a werewolf story. There are a couple of Rose Tyler shaped issues that I have with the episode at large, and also there are a couple of things that aren't quite as well integrated as I'd like. But
Mm.
overall, no huge complaints beyond season wide or character wide stuff. I really enjoy it. I think it's an 8.
Yeah, I'd go with an 8 as well. Not a, as I said, not a boundary breaking masterpiece, um, but like it's in like the upper level of a really solid Doctor Who episode for me.
Yeah,
So yeah, I'll give it
definitely.
an 8.
Cool. So next time we are continuing our Davros marathon. We'll be looking at Resurrection of the Daleks from the Fifth Doctor era.
Hmm, that'll be interesting.
Exciting times.
Mm-hmm.
Until then, I'm Alex,
I'm Fitz.
and Werewolf Howl. I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna actually do it.
Woo!